In this video, I'm going to show you how to composite shadows in shots where you've got a static camera, but an animated character with cast shadows. So obviously in this situation, you really only want to render one frame of the background because that's going to save you a huge amount of render time, not to have to render a whole sequence of the background. So you render one frame of the background and then the animated character in a separate sequence. But then that leaves you the problem of the cast shadows, because obviously they need to be animated along with a character, and they're going to need to be composited back into the background, but without getting a double shadow. So the first thing I need to do is to set up my render outputs. So first of all, I'm going to duplicate this render output, and the bottom one I'm going to rename to Final Color Output BG, and the one above I'm going to rename to CH, so one for the background pass, one for the character pass. This alpha output can be for the character. And then I need to add a couple more render outputs. So I'm going to go to render outputs, and I need a lighting, and I need illumination direct, and that's going to be in my background pass. So let me just rename it to reflect that, just so things are well organized. And then I also need a shadow density output. So I'm going to go to add layer, render outputs, lighting, shadow density. So that's all set up now. And now to create my render passes. So I'm going to create a new pass group, and I'll just call it passes. And my first pass is going to be my background pass. So I'll call it BG. And then I'm going to enable auto add, and I'm going to disable all the render outputs that I don't need. And now I need to set up my character so that he's not visible to camera and that he doesn't cast shadows. So the character is item masked in this group, so I'm just going to expand it and locate the shader, and I'm going to untick cast shadows and untick visible to camera. And now I just need to hit apply, disable auto add, and refresh preview to see if the character is indeed no longer rendering and no longer casting shadows. So now I'm going to set up a new pass, and this time I'm going to call it CH for character. And once again, I'm going to scroll back up to the top. I'm going to enable auto add, and I'm going to just disable all the render outputs that I don't need for this pass. So just keep these two that are labeled CH. And this time it's the background which needs to be invisible to camera. So I'm going to expand that group, and there's a shader in here, which I'm just going to drag to the top. And I am going to untick visible to camera. And then once again, I'll hit apply, turn off auto add, and I'll unpause preview just to see if everything's set up correctly. And it appears to be. Now before I create my shadow pass, I'm just going to do a bit of tidy up in my scene. So I'm just going to get out of the passes, and there's a few things that have come in with a referencing that I need to get rid of. So let me just disable these items in the shader tree. And what I need to do is to create an override material that my shadows are going to be cast on. So I'm just going to take specularity out, just make this diffuse color 1 and diffuse amount 100. And I'm going to drag this material in between the character, which is here, and the background, which is here. And I'm also going to add a shader. So let's get a special shader and just drag that above this material. And in the default state, I'd like these two to both be invisible, so I'm just going to hide them in the shader tree. And next is a case of going back into my passes group, and this time I'm going to create my shadow pass. So let me just call this new pass shadow. And once again, I'm going to enable auto add, and I'm going to disable the render outputs that I don't need. And I'm going to tweak the shading for my character, so I want him to be invisible to camera. He definitely needs to cast shadows, and I'm going to enable my shader and my material. Next, I'm going to go to the override shader that's overriding the background, and this should not cast shadows. I only want the cast shadows to come from the character. Finally, I'm going to go to the GI, and I'm going to disable it because I don't need global illumination in this pass. And I'm going to hit apply and disable auto add. And with that done, I'm going to unpause preview so we can have a look at the results. So you can see my character is invisible to camera, but he's casting his shadow into the scene. And now I'm going to switch preview to the shadow density output so we can see what's actually going to be rendered out. And I can see there's a couple of problems actually, because I've not only got the shadow of the character, but I've got some extra stuff being rendered. And these are coming from the additional lights that are in the scene. So I'm going to go to my lights, and the only light I really need to keep is this physical sun. I'm going to turn off the other two. And let me just switch my render output back. And you can see that now that I've turned off these other two lights, I've got a really clean path with only the shadow of the character included. So I need to make sure that these changes are actually included in the path. So I'm just going to hit auto add and quickly enable and disable both the lights and hit apply and then disable auto add. And now I'm basically ready to render this shot out and composite it in Nuke. So I've rendered my passes and I've brought them into Nuke, and now it's simply a case of compositing everything together and then masking the shadows correctly. So I'm going to start by selecting my backgrounds and adding a merge node, and then I'm going to connect that to the character. Let's connect a viewer to that as well. Just need to Shift X this so that it comps properly. And then the next thing I need to do is to add a grade node. Let me just do that. And I'm going to mask the grade node with this shadow pass. Let's just have a quick look at the shadow pass. That's the one we rendered out. So what I need to do now is add a shuffle node. And I need to turn this RGB into an alpha. So I'm just going to select alpha as the output. And I'm going to connect the mask connection of my grade node to the alpha of the shadow pass, which I've just shuffled out. Let me go back to my grade node. And now if I reduce the gain on the grade, you can see that the shadow is being created. But the problem I've got, if I zoom in, you'll see it more clearly, I've got this double shadow here, and that's what I need to deal with now. And this is where the direct lighting pass from the background comes in, because if you remember, this is one of the outputs I added when I was creating the scene. So let's just have a quick look at that. This is basically just a standard issue direct lighting output that got rendered along with the background. Now at the moment it's not that useful because it hasn't just got the main sunlight, it's also got the area light, and there's also a spotlight in the scene. And what I need to do is to turn this into a usable mask. Now, I could have rendered out a separate pass with only the sunlight showing, but I think this is more representative of what you get in real production. You're always going to get mixed lighting, and it's actually very easy to fix because all I need to do is to add a grade to it and then just bring the gamma down, and you can see it's dead simple to turn this into a usable mask. And so just like I did with the shadow pass, I need to turn this RGB image into a alpha channel. So I'm going to hit tab and add another shuffle node to my comp. And once again, I'm going to put the output to alpha. And that's basically now going to create an alpha channel from this RGB image to use as a mask. And so what I now need to do is to use this mask which I've just created to mask the output from the shadow density. So I'm going to hit M to add a merge node, and I'm going to connect it to the shuffle node coming from the shadow density. And you can see when I do that, it merges the two together. So what I want to do is to use the top one to mask the bottom one. So I'm going to change the operation from over into mask. And you can see when I do that, that I get the result that I want. I've got the shadow cast from the character, but it's being cut off by the shadow from the environment. So what I now need to do after this is to get the mask connection on my grade node and connect it to the merge node. And if I switch to my grade and I zoom in, you can see that I've got the correct result. There's no double shadow anymore. So all that's left to do is just to perfectly match this grade, which is something a good compositor could do very, very quickly.